Drew, excited to have you here, man.
Good to be here, Justin. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, dude, I'm excited to dive in. Obviously, I don't even know how long ago was it 2016 you kind of burst onto the scene. I think that's the year, right?
2011, actually.
Goodness.
2011.
So it was probably around 2016 that I was introduced to you because I got into the
Yeah,
self-development space and started noticing people online. And what you have done in the health world is super inspiring, right? And if people don't know your story, I want to start there. Like you
sure.
gained 60 pounds of fat, lost it again. Why would anybody ever do that?
So yeah, let me give you the little backstory before we jump into that. So I grew up in a family of 11 brothers and sisters, and we all played
Wow.
sports since I was a kid. So I played football and wrestling, so I was always active. I was always in shape. I never once struggled with my weight. Fast forward to 2009, I became certified as a personal trainer because that was something I was passionate about. Health and fitness was something I just kind of grew up loving, playing sports and stuff like that. And so here I was as a personal trainer, never been overweight a day in my life, trying to help people who were overweight every day of their life. And for me, I'm like, you guys, it's so simple. Like, it's here's your macros, here's your food, put down the junk food, go to the gym. Like, I don't understand why it's so hard. You just do it, and then you get the results. Like, why do you guys keep struggling? And I had one of my clients tell me at the time, Drew, you don't understand how hard it is for me or for people like me, because for you it's always been easy. And I was like, you're right. I can't argue with it. It has always been easy. And so I was trying to think of ways to gain a better understanding of, like, okay, what can I do to better understand why it's so hard for people? And then boom, this idea popped up in my head, and this light bulb went off, like, oh, what if you got fat on purpose and documented the journey? Maybe, that would teach you some lessons. And so I was like, all right, I'm just gonna wing it. I didn't have a marketing strategy. I didn't have media connections. I just kind of, like, I've started my own website on Squarespace, started my own YouTube channel, and just kind of like started filming me. And the idea was, for 6 months, couldn't exercise, right? For 6 months. And then I wanted to focus on the standard American diet. So highly processed foods. We've seen Super Size Me. We know what fast food will do to you. But I wanted to focus on everyday American foods that a lot of us grew up with in the 80s, for example. And that's the food that I ate. I put on 76 pounds actually in 2011 of pure fat over the
Unreal.
course of 6 months. Yep. And one of the hardest, most humbling things I've ever done. I realized very quickly how wrong I was in my approach to helping people. I was very humbled by that experience and learned so much empathy for those that struggle with weight loss, because I thought it used to be just a physical transformation. Like, here's your calories, here's your macros, here's your workouts, and you boom, you just do it. Until I went through that experience and realized how much of physical transformation is actually mental and emotional for people. And that's why people struggle with it. And so we can dive into all the lessons I learned, but that was the biggest takeaway. And I ended up losing the weight, right? Fit to fat to fit. So I lost the weight, luckily, but gained a whole new perspective and so much more respect and empathy for people. And that's where my brand was kind of developed, because the story actually went viral. I went on Jay Leno and Dr. Oz and Good Morning America and wrote a book, and the book became a New York Times bestseller. And the book turned into a TV show where I had 2 seasons of my own TV show where we put other trainers through this process to teach them the same lessons that I learned. And so that's the story in a nutshell.
Yeah, man, and I love hearing that because I think so. First of all, we live in a world where content is king, right? Like share it out.
Hmm.
But back then, it wasn't like an
Yeah.
automatic like let's hey record it, and all of a sudden everything's gonna blow up. You just need that one video to make you go viral and see where it goes. Let's talk about that for a second. I didn't know if we'd go here or not, but let's talk
Sure.
about that idea. Like, how were you even prepared, right? Like a lot of what I teach people now is like if you do have that one thing that goes viral, are you actually ready for what's gonna happen? Like what? How did you even prepare yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I wasn't prepared. I'll be totally honest with you. I didn't, like I said, I didn't have a marketing strategy. I just kind of, my hope was to get the word out there. So I told friends and family. This is before live streaming or Insta stories or TikTok. So it was just basically Facebook and YouTube for the most part, and just people sharing it, right? And it slowly, organically grew. And then, I would do these like free press releases and to see what happened. And one of them hit, and the producer of Jay Leno saw it and was like, "Hey, man, I want you on the show. We're going to interview you. We're going to bring you on with Chelsea Handler." And I was like, are you
That's
serious? Like, this
that's
is really
quite the
happening.
pairing.
Yeah, exactly. It was me and Chelsea side by side. You can go watch that old video. It's funny. It's really funny, actually. They did a really good job of that. But, I wasn't prepared for all this media attention that kind of happened overnight, because actually what happened, the reason that it went viral is a fitness blogger interviewed me because of what I was doing, right? and their blog got picked up by a subsidiary of Yahoo, and then Yahoo saw how much attention it was getting, and then Yahoo put it on their homepage of yahoo.com. So there I was on the homepage of yahoo.com, and then that's when everything blew up. Every producer, every TV show was calling me, calling my mom, calling like trying to get a hold of me. Like it was chaos. It was crazy. I was actually working in the medical field full time, and this was just like a part-time gig, part-time thing I was doing on the side. And then it went viral, and yeah, end of story. That's pretty much where things blew up.
Yeah, and I imagine obviously we hear about obviously you're not an overnight success, right? Like it's all this work and years and understanding the importance of macros and nutrition and fitness and working out. But then all of a sudden, bam, everything changes for you. What type of stuff, like how did you pivot like your whole entire life? Did you quit your job immediately? Did you start getting clients? Like what was that process like for you?
Yeah, good question. So no, it was I did the TV show thing. I was still doing my medical job. And then I would say about 3 months later, I got my book deal. And once the book deal happened, I made the jump from my cushy job in the medical field to the land of entrepreneurship. And that was a big leap of faith because I didn't grow up with an entrepreneur mentality. Like I just didn't. It was so new to me, and back then the game was so different than what it is now. I had to really learn how to monetize and market myself. From what I was doing, I didn't know that this was going to become a job. I didn't know this was going to pay the bills. So it was really interesting. And I'll be honest with you, like I've been in the game for since 2011 doing this. It's been a long, slow journey of learning and still learning of how to make this work and how to make this into a career. And it's evolved, and there's been ups and downs and good times and bad times and chaos sometimes. But here I am, still making it somehow. And I think 2016, the reason you picked that year is because that's the year that actually blew up even more because of Facebook ads and having a marketing team with ClickFunnels and being able to just blast it out there as much as before the algorithms changed. And so from 2016 to 2018, that really blew up my brand during that time with keto and my story of what I did with Fit to Fat Fit.
Yeah, and I love hearing you say like it's still a journey, right? It's still learning. I just hosted a retreat of high 6-figure, 7-figure entrepreneurs this last weekend, and that's exactly what we were talking about. Like, we think about the struggles when we begin, and then we realize there's even more struggles now because things are constantly changing and evolving. And I'm sure that's the same in the fitness world, right? You're constantly competing with the next fad diet, the next challenge, the next thing. Like, how do you stay, for lack of a better term, it's not the right word, for lack of a better term, how do you stay relevant when there's so many things changing around you?
It's a really good question. And I think, from a technical perspective, that's a different answer because it just depends on your strategy. But I think the biggest thing of the root of what you're asking about is knowing who you are and knowing what your message is and separating yourself from everyone else out there. Like what makes me different than everyone else? Sure, I did Fit to Fat to Fit and gained the weight, which let's be honest, a lot of trainers aren't going to do that because it's crazy. And I admit that. But it's not just that separates me. I think people that follow and consume my content realize that I don't just talk about health and fitness. What my brand has evolved into is something different than your traditional, typical bro science, gym bro type of fitness account where it's all about hitting your macros and getting ripped and shredded in hopes to get this body that will then magically make you happy, that will then solve all your problems. When in reality, I know that's not true. And I know that's just a myth that we buy into, that the fitness industry kind of dangles this carrot in front of people like, oh, look at this body, you can get this body too if you do this for 30 days or 60 days. And people are like trying to chase that carrot thinking if I do this then I'll get this body and I'll fill this void that I've been feeling. But just like money, it's the same thing. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't fill that void that people have that they're searching for outside of themselves. I think that's the issue that people have in the fitness industry. So for me, what makes me different is I know who I am. I know what my message is. There's a couple quotes or terms that I use, and one is like, your mess, let your mess become your message. And I've been very open about my personal journey. I talk about my personal life, and I talk about vulnerability and how that's changed my life as a human. So I don't just talk about my life as a trainer. I talk about, my life and share sometimes vulnerable stuff that for me is from the heart. And I think your vibe really does attract your tribe in this sense. So I think knowing who you are and knowing what your message is will bring, a certain type of demographic, and then understanding who that demographic is so that then you could cater to them, and knowing what they're going to want to hear from you is super important versus like, okay, who do I need to become in order to make the most money from these people? So people will do all kinds of crazy stuff and not be themselves in hopes to, you know, gain followers or gain, money in a sense. But they're not really being authentic, and they really don't know who they are, what their message is, other than just like posting pictures of their body. And so that's, for me personally, that works for me. And that's what I found that works best for people that are really trying to, in a saturated industry where everyone has a six pack, everyone has muscles. What makes you different than everyone else's? I think it's knowing who you are on a very deep level.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think, obviously
Hmm.
vulnerability and being honest with yourself and being empathetic are so important, especially sharing your story on a deeper level, because that, like you mentioned earlier, like it brings your tribe to you, right? It literally will find the people that you need to find instantly just by sharing openly and honestly. When did that change for you? Were you like that as a kid, or going through
Hmm.
this fit to fat to fit, was that your aha moment?
It was a little bit of all of it. But basically it started with a fit to fat fit, which was a very vulnerable journey where I put my life out there where people could see how hard it was for me. And they saw me have identity crisis during that, where I kind of freaked out being overweight. I'll be honest with you. Like, I did not, my identity was built around my body image, and my body was was my identity. And then when I got fat and became overweight, I freaked out. I wanted to go up to strangers and explain to them, like, hey, I'm not really overweight, this is just an experiment. Like, I was so self-conscious, right? Because I'd never been overweight. And it really taught me a lot about who I actually am I in my body, or is there more to me than just my body? And then I also had some personal life experiences. I went through a really hard divorce about 8 years ago. Was married for 10 years, and that broke me. That was my first of many rock bottom moments in my life. That but it was very public, right? Because I was a public figure, I couldn't hide it. So that changes you at the core of who you are. And so I did a lot of work on myself, went to therapy, life coaching, went on a journey to discover who I was. And I also left my religion at the same time. So I went through a
Well,
divorce. Well, yeah, I left my religion that I grew up in my entire life, the first 34 years of my life. And I had to discover who I was without those two things. And after years of, doing a lot of inner work, I finally was able to come out and share my story of what I had learned. And then from there, I started talking about what I learned publicly. And I think that's what made me more relatable. They already could relate to me because of Fit to Fat to Fit and stepping out of my comfort zone and gaining weight. But then talking about vulnerable things and lessons that I learned from mistakes and, um, you know, um, past issues, that made me more relatable, because it made me, in a sense, people are like, oh, you're human, you make mistakes just like everyone else, and you're owning your story. And I think, I don't know if you read Brene Brown's work, but her work has really helped me embrace vulnerability as a strength. There's power in owning your story, even though it's scary, even though you're going to get judged, even though you might receive some hate. But there's I want to give other people permission to be vulnerable too, because I believe vulnerability breeds vulnerability. And for me, sharing my story, actually, at first I thought this is going to ruin my business, my life's over. But from a business perspective, it only made people relate to me even more. And it just, the transparency there just made increase that relatability factor to where people trusted me more after that, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of how my brand evolved into what it is today, of this whole conscious fitness idea, which we'll probably get into a little bit later. But the inner work, like, no one talks about this in the fitness industry. No one talks about how important the inner work is, because your ability to do the outer work, like working out and eating healthy food, is determined by your mental and emotional state. So if you're going through a divorce, you're going through bankruptcy, going through a breakup, that affects your ability to stay consistent with eating the chicken and broccoli and going to the gym every day. Because let's face it, we're emotional creatures, and we are affected uh, strongly by our emotions. And so that's me helping people navigate the difficult path of negative or uncomfortable emotions is the key, in my opinion, to helping them live a healthy physical lifestyle. But they don't see the connection between those two things. But I do, because I've been through it myself, and now I can share coming out the other side of from a place of healing of how I've gotten there. And that is just as important as giving someone a meal plan or a workout program to help them on their path.
Yeah, I think a massive part of the game of life is showing up, right? So you talk about that rock bottom moment of going through that public divorce and feeling vulnerable and feeling like you failed and all these other things that you had mentioned. How did you keep showing up? Because I talk a lot about those rock bottom moments in life and how important it is to be able to move forward instead of allowing yourself to get stuck there. What was it about what was going on in your life that said, I need to keep showing up? Was it the money? Was it the clients? Was it just for yourself? Was it for your kids? What was it about that moment where you're like, okay, I just have to keep moving forward a day at a time?
It was being a dad. I'll be totally honest with you, because if I didn't have kids to have the purpose of serving someone else other than me, I think it would have been really, really hard to show up for myself at that time. Being a dad, being a father motivated me to pull myself out of that rock bottom moment. Because I think if I didn't have my kids, I would have stayed stuck in this victim mindset of, woe is me, like poor me because I got divorced and my life's over, and all the shame and all this guilt. And I could see myself just kind of like disappearing and never, coming out of that that victim mindset until I realized if I don't fix myself, then I'm just going to pass on all this self-hate, unconsciously to my kids, and they deserve better. They deserve the best version of me. So to become the best version of myself, I have to do the hard and comfortable work to show up as my best self for them. And that's really what helped me to keep moving forward and do the hard and comfortable work, like therapy and journaling and self-discovery and self-improvement, because I felt like they deserved that. And so that's kind of what helps keep me moving forward and showing up the best I could at the time. And I will say that, being vulnerable didn't happen right away. It took me years of coming from a place of healing first before I shared my story. So I think there's a difference between oversharing and being vulnerable. And for me, being vulnerable, it comes from a place of being healed, like doing the work so that you actually know how you can get out of it, versus like if you're just oversharing in the moment of what happened without giving people a roadmap of how you overcame it. I feel like then it's just kind of like sharing to get attention, if that makes sense. So I waited
100%.
years before I felt like I was ready to share my story and what I learned from it, to give people like, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable, but here, if you want to get out of the victim mindset, here's the steps I took that helped me. So hopefully that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And I love that you shared all that. One thing I always say is that your open wounds are for you to learn, but your scars are to teach other people, right? You have to get
Amen.
through that pain first, because otherwise you are being the victim. Like you try and come across as somebody who's like, hey, I'm healing, I can share this, but you're being the victim because you want that attention, whether it be a negative attention or a positive attention, right? And so
Yeah.
in this journey of healing, I mean, self-love is such a big thing. And without getting into my entire story, I'll just tell you really quick. My mom battled opioids for 20 years and ended up taking her life. Actually, 6 months before I launched this podcast, over 7 years ago, she ended up passing away. And when I looked back, I ended up going on a 3-month bender where I was blackout drunk 6 nights a week. And I woke up from that bender and I was like, okay, I have to feel these emotions, right? Like I was running from the pain. And I had two realizations. The first one was my mom didn't die because she was an addict. My mom died because she didn't love herself. And the second thing was I went, oh, I don't love myself either. Right. You talk about like passing that on to your kids, like subconsciously it was passed on to me because I didn't learn what self-love was. And so I always say the first 2 years of this podcast, every question I asked was for me. And a lot of that conversation was about how do I love myself? What is self-love? And so I want to ask you that question, something I haven't touched on in quite some time on the show, but what is your definition of self-love? And what are some things people can do to really begin to unlock that for themselves?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think to love yourself is being at peace with what is, as you are, as imperfect as you are. Can you still find love for who you are in this moment? And I think that's the biggest thing is, first of all, my heart goes out to you, man. I'm sorry to hear about your mom. And I know that must have been really, really hard on a deep emotional, spiritual level for you. And I can, only imagine the pain that you went through. And so I'm glad to see where you're at today, and kind of like, helping other people move forward in life, because you deserve it. And your posterity and your friends and family deserve it as well, to become the best version of yourself. So I'm very happy for you that you found that, because
Thank you.
you became aware of it. And for me, with my self-love journey, I grew up with a lot of self-hate. And this is why I think a lot of people do harmful things to themselves or to other people, is because hurt people hurt people. And until you become aware of why you're hurt or what hurt you, you're going to continue to pass that hurt on to other people that don't deserve it. So there's a good quote that says, if you don't heal what hurts you, you're going to bleed on those who didn't cut you. And it's
Hmm.
so true. And so the only way to overcome that is to become aware of why you're hurting in the first place. And that's where a lot of this doing this self-discovery work, whether it's through therapy, journaling, meditation. I've tried plant medicines that have really opened my perspective on myself and developing that self-love. But different things work for different people, to each their own. There's different ways to discover that. But I think coming to a place of peace with who you are as you are, with all your imperfections, and still coming to the realization that you are lovable. And for me, that was a game changer. Once I learned how to love myself at the age of 34, 35, everything changed. Because if your relationship with you can change, that changes all your other relationships, because everything's a mirror of how we see ourselves. If you hate who you are and you're judgmental towards yourself, you're going to manifest that and portray that on other people. And you're going to judge them and you're going to hate them for the same reasons you hate yourself. But when you love yourself, you don't have any hate towards other people, because you see them as a mirror of themselves. Like the way they see you is a mirror of how they see themselves. And you can be more empathetic and understanding towards people that are hurtful, because you can understand that they're probably in a place of hurting currently, and it's probably not their fault. Who knows what they've been through, right? So it changes everything when you learn how to love yourself. So hopefully that answers your question of what my definition of self-love is. I think it's just being
Yeah.
at peace with who you are as you are, and then from there, wanting to improve yourself, not from a place of self-hate or feeling less than, but because you want to keep showing up your best self for whoever it is that's in your life, whether it's your spouse or your kids or whoever it is, your followers.
Yeah, that's huge, man. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate the kind words as well. It's been,
Mhm.
I think everybody's going through a journey, and certain times you kind of feel like you're isolated on this island, right? And so you have all these setbacks where you're just like, I'm alone. I don't know what to do. And community becomes such a big part. So as you're going through this, and I imagine as you're going through a divorce, and I've never been through a divorce. I'm actually getting married for the first time on April 1st.
Congrats,
But
man.
thank
Congrats.
you, man. I appreciate it. Yeah. So by the way, finding self-love was the greatest thing to lead to a healthy
Amen.
relationship. But when I think about the pain that I've been through in life, whatever that looks like, and I'm sure my listeners is the pain they experience, you feel isolated. What did you do so you weren't isolated? Because that's when damage starts to happen.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. There were periods of isolation in this healing phase, and I will be honest with you, but it's probably because I went through a divorce, and I think being alone after a divorce is really, really important to discover who you are. So I think
Mm.
there's healthy isolation, and I think there can be unhealthy isolation. I think there's healthy isolation in, discovering who you are. So that whether that's sitting still in meditation, whether it's going for a walk out in nature, going on hikes. For me, it was very healing to be by myself and not look for myself in another person for a while, because I needed to figure out who I was before I jumped into another relationship. I think that's healthy isolation. Unhealthy isolation is kind of like a self-sabotage mentality, where you're just pushing people away because you feel unworthy or you feel unlovable, and being alone is the only way you can, you're kind of, it brings comfort in the self-sabotage. But as humans, we all need love and we all deserve love. And I feel like if you can be aware of why you're isolating, and understand what your intention is with wanting to isolate, is it coming from a place of wanting to grow and learn and learning to love yourself, or are you doing it as a way of punishment and self-sabotage? So it's a good question to ask before you go into isolation. But also, I did, I have my daughters, and I had to show up for them. And I think having human connections with friends or family members or getting out eventually definitely helped during the healing journey, because you can't stay isolated forever. So making sure you have a good support system, making sure you let people serve you. I think that's the biggest thing, is if you let people show up for you that want
Mm.
to show up for you, instead of pushing away. If someone wants to give you love and show up for you in a way that shows that they love you, let that into your life. It's not going to bring any negativity by letting people, show you some love.
Yeah, I want to talk about one of the processes that you used in your healing journey, which is plant medicine, right? It's a hot topic. A lot of people are talking about it. It's become much more accepted now than it was 2-3 years ago, even a year ago at this point. So how did you discover that, and what takeaways did you have in that journey? I have people around me and friends that have done it, and I'll be honest, I'm too scared. I've heard too many stories. So what was your experience like?
For me, it was a lot of research first, understanding what from a scientific perspective, what actually happens. And that's why I would listen to, podcasts like Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan, Tony Robbins, and their experiences, and then reading books like How to Change Your Mind, Stealing Fire, really changed my perspective of like, oh, I grew up with a perception of these substances because of the environment that I grew up in the 80s and 90s, the DARE program, drugs are bad, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think we're all programmed to a certain extent. The same thing with, and I saw it the same way when I got into the world of keto. We were taught fat was bad for you. We were programmed eating fat is unhealthy. But then when you learn more science about it, it's like, oh, actually fat is healthy for you if you eat it this way. And so it's like, okay, maybe I've been, programmed to think, certain plant medicines, aka drugs, are bad just because they're thrown into that category. But then you start researching and listening to other people's stories that you know and trust, and you're like, oh, these people had positive experiences and they've changed in a positive way. Like maybe there's something there. And then I feel like certain people, when they're ready, they'll feel called to do it. They'll feel ready. And I felt ready when I just jumped into it. Or sorry, when I actually did it. I didn't just jump into it like, hey, let's get fucked up, and sorry for my cussing, but like
No,
let's
man, you're
get
good. You can
wasted.
cuss all you want. Yeah.
Because I think it's all about the intention of like, are you doing it to escape? Are you doing it to numb or distract yourself? Or are you doing it to grow with an intention and purpose going into it? That's the biggest difference between any substance, whether it's plant medicines, alcohol, drugs, food. What is your intention with all of it? Is your intention to escape or numb or distract yourself from the pain? Or are you using these as medicines to help you grow and learn something about yourself? And that is the biggest game changer when it comes to any kind of plant medicine or any kind of substance, in my opinion, because as humans, we all like to escape. We all like to numb out. We all like to distract. Like you said, when you had the pain of losing your mom, it's so much easier to just drink yourself and drink the pain away. But I love a quote by Rumi. He says, the cure for pain is in the pain. And once you allow yourself to feel that pain, the pain can then teach you what is there to teach you, and then it'll pass through you and you don't have to hold on to it anymore. You don't have to suppress it anymore. But the problem is that we don't allow ourselves to feel it. And so I think for me, what plant medicines have done for me personally is allow me to fully feel my feelings. And I grew up with the opposite mentality of don't allow yourself to feel your feelings as a man. Don't cry, don't show emotion, suppress, 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 push away all negative emotions, but eventually it spills out, it explodes. And, I became broken. And that's when I was like open to these new methods, like plant medicines, because I had done the research and I felt comfortable trying them. I will say, yes, it can be scary. It's not for everyone. You got to do your research and understand what you're getting yourself into. But I think having the experience for me personally is kind of like facing your fears in a sense of surrendering to the unknown. And that's a part of this life, is how much are you able to surrender and let go of control? Because as entrepreneurs, as dads, as humans, we want to control. Our egos want to be in control of everything, and to let go of control is scary because we don't know what's going to happen. But then trusting that you're going to come back and that you'll be okay, which, let's be honest, most of the time most people are, but there are some instances where some people it's not right for them. But it's about letting go of control and surrendering to the experience and letting it teach you something versus trying to control the outcome and trying to control everything. So it's kind of like a metaphor for this life in a way.
No,
That
for
makes
sure.
sense.
And so, to get back to the fitness side of things, look, you did the Fit to Fat to Fit. your brand blew up, you were able to build a business around it, leave your day job, do all these things, and then you decided to do it again. And you just shared like all the emotional issues that you went through the first time and the identity
Yeah.
crisis and all these other things. Why do it again?
Yeah. I almost felt called to do it a second time. So the first time I felt called to do it as well, but after the first time, I swore I would never do it again because it was that hard. It really was that hard. And I was like, I will never do this again. And then 2020 happened, which was chaos in the world, riots and the global pandemic and all kinds of division. That's what I saw. And my message was one of empathy. And I feel like empathy still is a game changer that can save the human race. If we can learn how to have empathy, the hard part is we lack empathy so much in this world, especially in the fitness industry. We're so quick to judge. We see someone's social media posts and we put them into a category and label them without even knowing their story or knowing what they've been through. And we're so unempathetic. We just lack the empathy. And so I felt called to do it a second time as a 40-year-old, to spread the message of empathy. But then also, when I first did it, I was 31. I was younger. My metabolism was different. My hormones were different. And let's be honest, social media wasn't what it is today. So not a lot of people saw it as it happened. A lot of people came onto the scene like you in 2016, 2017, and they're like, oh my gosh, he did this thing years ago. No one saw it as it happened. So doing it in 2020 gave me an opportunity to do it again as an older, person, 40 years old, which I know it's harder for that age demographic, but I wanted to show them that it's still possible. But then also with social media and being able to, live stream a lot of it and do Insta stories so people could see behind the scenes what really goes on during this fit experiment. And then also in hopes to bring more empathy to the fitness industry. So that's kind of the main reasons why I did it again. And it was
Was
once
it,
again very hard.
yeah, was it harder at 40 than it was at a younger age?
Comparing like, from a pure like 30-year-old versus 40-year-old perspective, it was harder in certain ways, but my methods had evolved. So my dietary protocol and my exercise regimen was different and more advanced, I would say. So I was still able to lose the weight. It was harder from a mental and emotional perspective. I was in a different place of life. This time around, I had a girlfriend. I was in a relationship. My daughters were 9 and 11 instead of newborn and 2-year-old at the time when I did it in 2011. And I was just in a different place in my life that created more challenges. Plus, I went through a really hard breakup with my girlfriend, who was my girlfriend for 2 years, and we were very serious. And in the middle of it, we freaking went through a breakup, which was heartbreaking and just like, but I still had to keep moving forward. I had to wear a mask and like, hey, I went through this breakup, but I'm still doing this journey. It was very emotional. And what's interesting about that is the food that I was eating before to gain the weight, like I was eating it to gain the weight. Now I was eating the food to numb the emotions, the sadness, the loneliness, the depression from the breakup. And that's where my eyes were open to the power of emotional eating and why people get stuck in these vicious cycles when they go through a breakup or they have hard emotional times. Food is the most accessible drug. Let's be honest. It's easy, it's cheap, it's affordable, it's convenient, and it tastes freaking good, man. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, I could eat that all day.
Yeah.
It's amazing, So I see why people get stuck in those vicious cycles of emotional eating, and it created more empathy for me, and so even more lessons learned on the second time.
Yeah, and I want to get to the conscious fitness conversation, but before we get there, you mentioned hormones as well. Have you looked into hormone therapy? Is that something you do? So one of my clients and good friends, Natalie Jill, she runs a fitness business.
I know her.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
so her podcast pivoted to midlife conversations. So she often talks about hormone therapy. Obviously, she's 10 years advanced to you, but have you looked into that? Are some clients doing it? Are you doing it? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I have. I've looked into it, and I'll be totally honest and transparent. I've tried a testosterone replacement therapy twice in my life, but it's been years. One time I think was 5 years ago. I did these pellets injected into my butt, and they're supposed to last 6 months. It was crazy. And then I did the injectable for about like I say 3 months or so, maybe like in 2017, 2018. But I since then I don't use it. I'll be honest with you, not yet. It's not something I'm opposed to. I'm just trying to do the best I can without it for as long as I can. And then if I do need to use it, I'm not against it. I think you can use it in a healthy way, but I am totally transparent about anything I use. I have used it before in the past, but didn't really notice a whole lot of difference, to be honest with you. But it's definitely something that I'm not opposed to. And if I feel like some of my clients are right for that, then we have technology to be able to help people out with that. And if I know for a lot of people, it is a game changer. It's like night and day.
Yeah, that's awesome. So obviously you touched on it earlier and we talked about it before we record, but this conscious fitness journey that
Yeah.
you walk people through and how it's just so much different and so much more involved than just your macros and just your movement. So talk a little bit about where that came from and kind of what you're walking people through now in this new journey.
Yeah, so everything that we've talked about, which is kind of cool because it kind of like paves the way for why conscious fitness was even created. Just the past year or so, I kind of came up with this idea because of my journey of going from self-hate to self-love and building that self-awareness. Because I think there's a really good quote by Anthony DeMello. He says, "What you're aware of, you're in control of, and what you're not aware of is in control of you." And so the key to overcoming any kind of addiction or loops that we're stuck in with our brain, awareness, self-awareness is the key. And so building that self-awareness is so important to help people overcome, these cycles that they get stuck in, whether it's food addiction or alcoholism, or they can't figure out why they can't live a healthy lifestyle. And so my approach with conscious fitness is teaching people how to do the hard things we know we're supposed to do, like exercise and diet, but from a place of self-love and worthiness and self-acceptance, instead of a place of less than or self-hate, which is what people tend to do when they come into the fitness industry of like, okay, I'm going to get ripped and shredded this year, no sugar, no alcohol, like let's go 5% body fat all the way. And they think that if they do that, they'll get this body that will make them happy, fill that void, right? That even if they get the body, they realize that still something's missing. So conscious fitness is about learning to love yourself and accept yourself as you are, as imperfect as your body is. And from there, doing the physical stuff, the working out and eating healthy becomes so much more manageable and easier when you're coming from a place of self-love versus a place of self-hate. And I'm sure you could attest to this too. When you flip the switch, being able to love yourself, finally, everything changes. Your relationship changes, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with your body, your relationship with food, all of that changes. And now the things that you used to hate doing, like working out and exercising and eating healthy, don't seem like a chore anymore, but you learn to fall in love with the process. And if you can learn to fall in love with the process, then the results kind of take care of themselves. They become a byproduct. And so conscious fitness is just that, all of that I just explained in a nutshell. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And it's true. Now, do you ever feel, obviously somebody who used to have self-hate issues and everything else in between, do you ever feel yourself slipping back into that? And if you do, what do you do to get yourself back to a good place?
Yeah. Yeah. I think these issues will always be there. I think, people think, oh, once you're healed, you're 100% healed and you don't need to do any more work. It's like working out. Once you're in shape, you don't need to work out anymore. It's a constant daily battle where there's triggers, and every relationship you're in, whether it's a, romantic relationship or whether relationship with your kids or relationship with friends, there will be triggers. There'll be life moments that happen that trigger you back to those old mindsets. The key is to not beat yourself up for feeling that way or wanting to self-sabotage, because that's normal, that's human. We're going to have those experiences. But the ability to detach from that part of you is the key to not going down that path of self-sabotage and really doing some damage. Allowing yourself to feel the feelings is very important. So feel the anger, feel the sadness, feel the hate, feel whatever it is, allow yourself to feel it. And then from there, let it pass through you, detach from it, and be able to move forward as your best self. But sometimes that may take a while. Last year, I'll be totally honest with you, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I went through one of the darkest depressions of my life. And I had all the tools available to me, whether it's therapy or plant medicine or journaling or meditation. I had all these tools at my disposal. But, for whatever reason, God, the universe, life realized I needed to be taught another lesson. And I went through a really dark, deep depression from like August through December of last year, not this past year, but the year before. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever been through, but it doesn't mean that I, wasn't healed, or doesn't mean that None of it mattered. It did, because my ability to get out of it, I think, was mostly because of the tools that I had, just of consistently showing up and doing them, even though it took a while to get out of it. So it doesn't mean your life's gonna be pain-free. It doesn't mean you're gonna be happy and positive vibes only. You're still gonna have those hardships. You're still gonna be triggered. You're still gonna be human, but your ability to detach and not create identities around, whatever hat you wear, whether it's a dad, a business owner, a spouse, or whatever it is, learning to detach from those as like your identity, is really important, and it's something that you got to learn how to do, and I'm still learning. So
Yeah, man. And obviously anything at any moment can trigger any of those feelings and bring you back to that place. But like you said,
so true.
as long as you have the tools in place, it makes it a lot easier. Like imagine if you didn't do the work before, how long
Yeah,
that depression would have lasted. You know what I mean? It could have been the end. And so many people struggle with that. So I'm so glad that you share that so openly and honestly, to understand that nothing's
of course.
perfect, right? It's that we
Yeah.
navigate it one day at a time and we do the best we can. And so I'm so glad. So how do people get involved with your conscious fitness challenge? I think it's a challenge, right?
Yeah, it's a 30-day thing that I do every month. Every 30 days, we kind of rotate the challenges. It's a mix of physical stuff. So, like, for example, this month we're doing like, some type of timed workout. So we've done rucking before. We're doing there's usually a nutrition aspect to it, but it's very small and simple. It's not like, hey, do this whole meal plan or like this type of a diet. It's very simple steps. And then on the mental and emotional side, we're reading this book together as a group, as a team. We're doing these list of meditations. Sometimes cold showers are thrown in there, just to help people do these challenges that are hard and difficult and uncomfortable. But they're learning how to do it from a place of self-love, so that it doesn't seem like this chore. And it's not about weight loss. It's not about getting ripped or shredded, but it's about learning to fall in love with the process as you start to fall in love with yourself. And every 30 days, I kind of do a new challenge. So people can just go find it at fit2fat2fit.com. And yeah, I talk a lot about it on my social media as well, which is just fit2fat2fit on all my channels.
I love it. So I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody on the show. It's a two-part question. The first part is,
Okay.
what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are
Mhm.
3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
It's a good question. I think success can be defined in so many ways. I think for me, the people that I look up to the most in this life are people that don't care what other people think, and that are truly happy with who they are, right? They're at peace with who they are. And that could be someone that's really rich. It could be someone that's really poor. It doesn't really matter with their monetary status. I think it just matters with, I think, those 2 things, that they don't care what other people think about them, and they genuinely love their life. They love who they are. For me, that is success, in my opinion, because that makes you the richest person in the world.
Yeah.
Just being totally happy and content with where you're at. And and then what are 2 or 3 things I do every day to ensure that? Is that the other
Yeah.
question?
Yep.
Yeah, that's man, every single day, when at my morning routine, I do meditation, and I set my intention and do some journaling where I do gratitude list. I do positive affirmations, and yeah, then I also set my intention for the day in my journal. And that's kind of what keeps me on track every day to kind of live that my best life, and that successful life that I just described, as best as I can. It's not perfect. Having kids, I'll be honest with you, is one of the hardest things I've ever been through, especially 2 like teenage daughters. It comes with its challenges, and so every day is an opportunity for growth. Every argument is an opportunity for growth, and just seeing. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. Have you seen that
Dude,
movie?
me and my fiance just watched it. Holy crap, it's amazing. Like
It's amazing.
half the time I was like, what the
Yeah.
hell is going on? And then at the end, I was like, this movie's incredible.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time, but it kind of goes to show you that, like, yes, nothing matters, and you could look at that as horrible and sad and depressing, or you could look at nothing matters and see the beauty in it, and see the beauty in every single, thing, whether you're doing taxes or you're doing laundry, or the mundane things can suck, or they could be awesome, and we get to choose our perspective, and that we have that power. And so that's that movie is one of my favorite movies of all time, dude. So I just watched that last night as well, and it just fresh on my mind. So I just wanted to bring that up, man.
Everything except for the hot dog fingers. That part's a little weird. And so anybody listening
It
who's
is
seen it, that
weird.
part's a little weird.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
funny. It adds comedy to this very, very heavy movie.
yeah. It's very deep,
But
but also
it
funny.
really makes you think, right? Like it makes you think of the broader picture of what's actually happening in this life. And I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard some stories about the plant medicine journey, and I'm sure you've seen some of the things, essentially seen some of the things they're talking about in that movie. It had to have been
Yeah,
born from that journey. It had to have been.
probably,
Yeah,
probably.
for sure. So I wrap up every single conversation with the same question. But before we get there, is there anything else you want to add or let my audience know?
No, I just, I don't know your audience very well, but just if anyone, if any of this resonates with any of you, just, my biggest thing is like, if you could learn how to love yourself, everyone deserves love. And I think everyone's worthy of love and everyone's lovable. And I know it doesn't sound very manly or like, that's not going to get you a six pack, but man, if you could learn to love yourself, everything in your life is going to change. I promise you, like for the better. And then you're worth it. You're worth it to do the hard and comfortable things that require that, whether it's talking to a friend or reaching out to a therapist or, having those hard conversations with loved ones. It's worth it. Life is too short.
I love it, man. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. Since the show is called The Growth Now Movement, that question is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Oh man. Shoot. It's always been the hardest moments, whether it was my divorce, leaving my religion, my breakup from a few years ago, and my depression from last year. Those have been the biggest growth moments ever, and those are the biggest lessons that I've learned from the hardest moments, which sucks because it's like, why do we have to go through such heartache and pain to learn these lessons? But ultimately, that's the way we learn, is through the hard times. And it sucks because I'll let you know, like, you don't have kids, do you?
I have two bonus kids, and they're
Oh, okay,
12
there
and
you
9,
go.
so I know the ages too.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
quite the journey for me. It's been the last
It's
4
just,
years, and I'm learning every day.
it's awesome, but seeing your kids go through pain is one of the most excruciating things as a parent, because you know that that's going to teach them something because it taught you something, but to see them go through it is really hard because you want to control and protect and keep them from experiencing pain because you see the pain that they're going through, but you can't ultimately, and that's where they're going to learn the biggest lessons. And it's hard. It's a mind fuck sometimes. I'm not gonna lie, it's really hard. But unfortunately, that's the way life is, and that's, you could stay stuck in the victim mindset, or you can let that bad thing, catapult you, and let your mess become your message in a sense.
I love it, man. Drew, thank you so much for coming on the
Yeah.
show and sharing your wisdom, but more importantly, putting yourself out there in such a vulnerable way, because I think those are the things that change the world. And so at the end
Mhm.
of this life, whenever that may be, like you can look back and go, I've done some good shit. So thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Justin. Justin, it was a pleasure.